Welcome, everyone, to our special interview with Jonathan Primo Fuego que Galicia, executive at Aguante Publishing. In today's ever-evolving literary landscape, self-publishing has emerged as a powerful avenue for authors to bring their stories to life and connect directly with readers. Aguante Publishing has been at the forefront of this movement, providing authors with tools, resources, supports needed for successfully navigating the self-publishing journey. Jonathan, with his extensive experience and passion for empowering authors, is here to share with us his insights on what it takes to thrive in the world of self-publishing. Whether you're a first-time author looking to publish your debut novel or an experienced writer seeking new strategies for reaching a broader audience, this interview will cover essential topics ranging from the publishing process and manuscript evaluation to marketing strategies and post-publication support. Join us as we delve into the key components of self-publishing, uncover valuable tips and best practices, and explore how Aguante Publishing can help authors achieve their publishing goals. Without further ado, let's welcome Jonathan Primo Fuego que Galicia. Welcome,
Thank you.
Jonathan.
Thank you. And thank you for having me today. What a wonderful
Yes.
introduction.
Oh, thank you. So we just want to start off with first, can you give us an overview of Aguante Publishing and its mission? Specifically, how does Aguante Publishing how does Aguante Publishing support self-publishing authors in bringing their stories to the world?
That's a good question. From a standpoint of the niche that we provide to a person who is going to be self-published, because self-publishing with its very nature basically means that the person is not going through a traditional publishing house. They're going to do everything on their own. But even with that being understood, one of the things that we offer is explaining what they're going against when they choose to take their book that way. I mean, especially when you say, I'm going to write my book and I'm going to self-publish it. The term itself, self-publishing, means I will not use any assistance of an actual classical publisher. I'm going to reduce those costs and I'm going to apply the skills that I have in an industry that I may not completely understand. And that's one of the services that we do. We have an interesting niche. I mean, most of the publishing that we do is for our in-house writers. When you take it from the standpoint to saying, okay, we want to offer something outside of our traditional publishing to non-traditional publishing opportunities called self-publishing, what we look at is educating that person so they know exactly the reason that publishers exist and what are the things they need to incorporate to be the same thing, because they still have to do publishing. It's just that now they're going to do self-publishing, and that means that they're going to provide all the services that we normally provide for clients themselves to themselves. So that
Okay.
overview should be always viewed as they're getting that formalized education to really know what we do when we do it for clients as well.
Excellent. Can you walk us through the key steps an author goes through when they choose to self-publish with Aguante Publishing?
Well, yes, the first step I will always say is for them to really understand that that the steps that they're going to learn if they interact with us on a niche product that we do for the local community outside of not being an in-house writer is that they're really making a decision to do everything on their own. I think that's the first thing they have to accept. They're going to go through the process, and we're looking at, as far as speed is concerned, how fast do they want to get their product to the market? And for a lot of self-publishers, as fast as possible, right? That's what they're
Okay.
thinking. Well, that also means that they have all the experience of each department when it comes to the design department, when it comes to going over the way that what size book will it be in? How many words will it be? Would it be hardback, paperback? Is it only going to be digital content? Can they afford to only put out a digital content where they're only making $2.99, but their work ethic and everything they put into the book really cost around $42 per book?
Okay.
That's one of the greatest things I've learned. A lot of self-publishers, if they take a step back, they say, I'm going to put out a 99 cent or a 2.99 book, which means that they're going to have to sell a lot of digital books to replace the good faith, or we like to call in business, you always have this when you first start off. You actually have good faith income, and that's the same income that you would do if you work at a regular job. And that tends to be discounted a lot of times. In their minds, it's just, I just want to get my book out. I want people to start reading my book. And even though I'm selling it for $2.99, well, how much would it cost for you to replace your income at your regular job at 299? You may need to sell over 800,000 copies,
Right.
and then you may still have some cost because you got to still print, ship. There's a lot of things associated with that, and our niche product kind of walk them through that step so they can make that determination. I know it's about making more money and giving up less, but do you also know what it takes to actually to not give up money, and or if you don't give it up but you don't make more too at the same time?
So I hear you talk a lot about your niche or your niche in this market. So what sets Aguante Publishing apart from other self-publishing platforms?
100% the authors that go through our self-publishing training or our self-publishing advisory services, that they keep 100% of their everything for their book, but they also leave out with understanding how it is to be a CEO book author, because at the end of the day, they need to protect their literary library. So that's what makes us unique. We constantly get them to focus on their literary work as a whole versus one book in totality.
How does Aguante Publishing evaluate manuscripts, and what criteria are most important during the process?
Well, okay, so I have to say this because if I don't, then I'm going to regret it later.
Okay.
Each on a case by case basis, because if a person is going through the niche product that we offer to the local community or to anyone that wants to go through self publishing and have a better understanding what they're getting themselves involved in, then we first got to start off what is their overall goals, and that's really
Okay.
going to determine how they process. Because I meet a lot of authors, and what those authors will say is that I really don't have a lot of money, and since they don't have a lot of money, they're still trying to push through the book at this time versus stabilize their business venture in their literary library. So they're thinking that if I just can get this one book through the finish line, when they should be thinking about, I'm not doing this for one book. There's hobbyists out here, and the hobbyists never intended to make a dollar. But if you're writing to make a dollar, whether you do digital, hard copy, or paperback, even if you, and we say digital, you think about Kindle, you think about Apple, you think about Google, think about Barnes and Noble, anywhere where that digital product is, Amazon, you just keep this in mind. You at the end of the day, what is your overall goal, and how does that affect the way that you write your next literary work?
Okay. I guess the next aspect would be then, since we kind of rolled into that, is what, as far as marketing promotion goes, how is marketing, or how can that be something that Aguante Publishing will offer to help authors? Let me start this over. I apologize. Marketing can be challenging for self-published authors. What strategies and services does Aguante Publishing offer to help authors market their books effectively?
Okay, that's a great question. Um, and it's going to depend upon that author. Is the author willing to make sure that they are the face? I always explain this to people. I mean, you have a non-living entity in the paperback book, and you are a living entity. So if you place a piece of paper that's non-living, it once was living, I do understand that, but it's now non-living before a living person. Like, I want my book to be more popular than me. That's really the wrong perspective. So it's we have a tremendous amount of talented writers that do literary work in the fiction and nonfiction area of all society. Now, if they make a choice to say that this book is going to be more important than me, we do believe here at Aguante Publishing that is a fundamental mistake. Human beings are meant to be loved. Books are meant to be read.
There you go. That makes complete sense. How does Aguante Publishing assist those authors in building their brand and reaching their target audience then?
Okay, it's twofold process. The first product is for them to define what their target audience is and begin to get that target audience to understand them as an author. As that is defined, maybe it's not, and you've heard this before, a person who lives in a local area is not really welcome in their own local area, but they can go two neighborhoods over and everybody will read them, or two states over and everybody will love them, but in their own hometown they struggle. That's not uncommon. Part of it is people knew you prior to you writing this book, and they also seen you quit a whole lot. So the authors who never came in contact with you, didn't know that you worked at a bank previously, they don't have a bias. They just are taking you on the totality of your work and then reading and enjoying it. So the first step is to really describe and start out with a wide view, not a narrow view. But what I mean by wide is, let's go into areas where you're not known first, because that's where you have less representation and less bias. And then let's scale it back, that because in business in general, when it comes to early adoption of any source of literary work, you find it to be two ways. People who know you, they're doing it to support you, but they haven't adopted yet. They're not your first one that says, you know what, I'm diehard. I'm buying your book and I'm buying 10 other copies to give to my friends, or I'm gonna buy your book and I'm gonna have 10 of my friends pay $5 more to buy your book, and I'll bring that back to you. So I'm gonna mark your book up. That's not the normal process, just to be very clear. So when we're thinking about marketing, we're thinking about selling them on their literary work, or at least teaching them to sell their literary work, not just one book. Because that's the mistake. If a person just thinks you write one book, that's all they're going to think that they can, kind of grab from you, just one. He just wrote one. No, I'm writing a literary work. So we may want to get you to focus on your literary work. Every 2 years, a book's being released. Get them to think longer than just what they have in front of them.
That's really good, and I'm glad you say that, because that leads right into my next question as far as focusing on post-publication support. What kind of support can authors expect from Aguante Publishing after their book is published?
If they go through the program, or they decide to take the opportunity to sit down just to consulting, they can expect to be focused. We're going to treat them like a CEO, no matter what takes place. They're going to be CEO authors. So I just want to make sure everyone understands that, Patrick. It's so important that they understand they are the CEO. So part of us supporting them is that they show up for the support. Do you know how many times we've worked with people in the past and they don't show up for that support? They only show up for the attention, but not the support. So
Right.
follow up with them being in the meeting and saying, look, this is where I am today, and this is the next project. That is the most important thing. You cannot be self-published and then ask someone else to actually be the CEO, because most authors they do have an ego, and they're not going to like the fact that someone else is pretty much a pseudo false CEO for themselves. They're like, no, this is my book. And I'm glad you said that. So now you need to show up and then state what the next literary work is, so that we can continue to build on that literary library.
Perfect. Are there opportunities for authors to participate in promotional campaigns, events, or workshops organized by Aguante Publishing?
Yes. There's an opportunity every month. There's an opportunity actually every week, depending upon where they're at. If their book is already printed, so what they're trying to do at that particular point is to begin to, again, brand themselves on their literary work. And we have opportunities even today for them. If they're looking at saying, my book's already written, it's already on Amazon, my book's already written, it's already at Barnes & Noble. Yes, we have programs right now that will assist in the marketing of them in totality.
It's clear that Aguante Publishing is deeply committed to empowering authors through every stage of their journey. And I hear you talk about some of these education opportunities. And so I guess that flows right into, what are those opportunities that Aguante Publishing offers as far as educational resources or training for authors to better understand the self-publishing process?
One of the first things I'll say is this: measurement and management. This is where most authors, honestly, I'm not particularly sure how this happens a lot, but most authors don't come from the finance industry. Most authors come from a sales perspective, or from a perspective of closing off people. So when you have those two come into a room, you have to get them to think from a measurement and management standpoint. Okay, without being able to measure, they can't manage the flow of their literary work, and being very direct. I mean, you have to be able to have expectations. There's nothing worse than an author that says, well, maybe nobody will buy my book. Then what my question is going to be, what are you writing for then? What motivated you to write if you don't expect them to read? So there should be an expectation to read. So it's really that development for them to be able to show that they're a human being that's worth listening to and reading. That is the most critical aspect that we cannot disconnect. Authors are human beings, not books. And we have
Absolutely.
to, that's one of the things I try to stick in people's minds.
How does Aguante Publishing facilitate a sense of community among its authors? Are there like forums or networking events for authors to connect and share experiences?
I would say that there are at times, but I think early on the goal would be not to allow them to get into an area where it's called silent competition. So when you put two different authors in a room, both of them want to tell you about their book. And eventually neither one of them want to back down. But the one that does back down says, okay, this person is a little bit farther than me, and they use comparison. It's very important earlier on that we build them up before we put them in a networking event because of that competitiveness and what we like to call presentation of what you're working on. Authors are very sensitive. Uh, they may not want to always admit it, but they're very sensitive to criticism. So if you hear someone that is more confident than you can lose an early young author. They get turned off very quickly. That's from experience, just so you know.
How does Aguante Publishing gather their feedback from authors about their publishing experience, and what measures are taken to continuously improve their services?
Well, if a person's being self-published, they have the right to select where they want to get it at. If they go through us and they said, "Oh, I would like to have my book published through you guys, and I still want to be self-published," this is the size of my book. This is I have everything for my book that I pretty much need. I just want to make sure that when it comes to the point of starting and then gaining the money back that I invested in my book in order to recoup it and make a profit, the next step they're going to be saying is, okay, now that I'm able to have a marketing structure that's pretty much ironclad, I understand my measurement and my management. The next thing that I want to make sure that I clearly understand is how this book moves from where the manufacturer onto the shelves of maybe other stores or in clients' hands. Well, we start by this. We always have a review board. And a review board allows someone to get enough feedback before the book is ready. Because we may find out at this particular time that, yes, the book is completed. However, we actually got the wrong review board looking at this book. And that's not uncommon. There's been many people who were told that their book was not ready, and come to find out the world was ready for it, but they had it in front of the wrong people. So making sure the right focus group has their books to read it. That's going to be that key, that early stage of reading their overall manuscript and making sure that it is in the right hands with the right people. That's one of the things that I can say that we try to make sure is that we get it in the right hands with the right people, so that you get a clear understanding the reason that your book, where it needs improvement at. And it could be just as simple as the cover. Most people don't realize some of the covers of some of the books, they liked it, but it wasn't thought out for marketing. It was more thought out because it was something they liked, not necessarily something that defines what's in those pages.
Earlier, I heard you talk about the fact that authors need not to think about solely on one book, but rather look into the future as far as 2 years down the line and so forth. So what advice would you give to authors looking to sustain their writing career over multiple books and years?
That this is not a hobby. That is the best advice I explain to them. You're going into an industry of, even if you say self-publishing, let's just put it here, completed work that's designed to entertain the general public. So we all know that one-hit wonders happen in music and in books. They are one-hit wonders.
Mhm.
But if you're looking for a job, which traditionally authors were part of houses, publishing houses, they worked for the publishing house, they wrote all the time, and those books got put out. They must think in that regards. You are your own publishing house. And if you're only willing to write from a hobbyist standpoint, then you're in an area where people make profit. And you have to understand that you cannot be in an area where you're going to have to pay for the hobby. And eventually, I've always said this, the only reward that you will get is that you have a book on the shelf that nobody reads. But you get to point to it and you get bragging rights. Is that the purpose you're writing your book?
No, I hope not. So we know how many, you just kind of touched on this a little bit. So many of our authors and individuals go into it, and those that are successful have had numerous negative reviews. So I guess my question would be to you is, what advice does Aguante Publishing offer to authors on handling negative reviews and criticism?
Aguante publishing in Spanish means endurance. You have to understand in America, people still have the freedom of speech. They're just not your client. If you made any other product right now and you have a person who is 7'2" and you make shorts for 4'10", you would accept that he's just not your clients. You need to look at it the same way. I gave my book to a person who's not my client, and I misread the person in front of me. I was more excited about sharing my book, but I never listened to see, do they like fiction or nonfiction? Do they like business, or do they like, what is it that their genre is? Because if you can't tell what their genre is, then you can't really tell, are you actually with the client that's yours?
So, are there any support systems in place that help authors cope with this emotional aspects of publishing?
Yes. And that's the reason that we go back to the beginning. See, they have to understand that what comes with success is also correction. Now, correction, and I mean, opinion and correction are two opposite polar ends of the same table. I mean, it's at the same table, just one's at one side, one's at the other. So it is normal. But they do need to accept this though. If they cannot handle criticism at all, then they need to begin to, starting from day one, learn that it's part of the business. Someone is going to always have an opinion who is not your client. And remember that. And the people who are your client, they actually not going to give you an opinion. They're going to give you correction. They're going to say, well, you probably should have included this. And they say, I would buy it if you would have included this, or if you would have said it this way. So they're going to tell you a mapping clue, an insight to a truth that actually allows you to evolve as a better writer, versus someone gives you opinion and they're never going to buy your book anyway.
All right. So we want to make sure that people are not writing just as a hobby. So I guess that leads us into that financial management part. What financial advice does Aguante Publishing offer to authors regarding budgeting for publishing, marketing, and other expenses?
Uh, you know, again, this is one of those that's subjective, but I'll answer it very briefly. The first thing we do is we look at the realistic standpoint of the reason that you're doing this self-publishing, and seeing that there's another option for you, because a lot of times there's individuals who can self-publish because they have the resources to do so. But most of the self-publishing today is because they don't have the resource. And they're trying to do it from a standpoint of cutting costs versus building a team. So when we sit down, we try to figure out, are they actually trying to circumvent team building for their literary work? Or is it the fact that it's generally costs where they're impatient, they're impulsive, they want it out as fast as possible. But when it does, I mean, from end to end, from writing to distribution, they can't even put it in. If somebody was to order 1,000 copies, they wouldn't be prepared to ship them out because they don't have the essential delivery process even intact yet. Remember, they're self-publishing, so they should have certain things already established. And now we live in times where people look at, well, I could just drop ship it. But even if you're going to drop ship it, you still got to get those books to the location so they can actually be done. I mean, some people say, Amazon does drop shipping, but you can actually have your books, send it over to Amazon. And I'm not promoting Amazon at all, but I want to make a point that I've seen on multiple occasions. An individual said, well, I went through Amazon to have my book published. However, Amazon still requires you have a certain amount of books. And in the process of that, you may have said, oh, well, I'm not going to have it printed through Amazon. I've already had it printed somewhere else, but I'm going to put it on Amazon. But what happens if you got 1,000 orders, but you only have 400 books? See, these are things that I don't think people look at. Look, you can be put in a situation where you didn't get enough books printed. Because remember, you're an author, and you were a good one at that. So if you cannot think and say, do I have all my bases covered? This is what we bring to the table. And that's what makes it a niche, because in one way you would say, do you really want to tell people this, Aguante? Because this is some of your secrets. No, some of these things is practical business modeling. And it's not a secret. Every business has to have practical steps in order to operate. But this is from the standpoint to allow a person to get that one thing they don't have from someone who's in the industry versus someone who's another author. One of the worst things you can do is get advice from an author who's actually not in the publishing industry or not in the distribution side, or worst case says, well, this is what I did when I printed my book. But then you say, well, can I see your sales over the last 5 years? Right. And these sales may not necessarily be book sales, just sales of anything. Because I mean, a new author is not going to have any sales. Well, what have you sold or sold for anyone else? Well, I haven't, but I wrote the book 10 years ago and I've only sold 50 books. Can you really take the advice of that person?
I would hope not.
Right? But so many
What-
people do though, Patrick. I mean, so
they
many people
do.
take that advice. Like, so I have a friend
Absolutely.
that wrote. So, that's a downside to this. It's a downside because we go to familiarity versus truth a lot of times.
Well, Jonathan, we want to thank you for sharing your invaluable insights for us today. Your detailed explanations have illuminated the self-publishing process and the robust support Aguante Publishing offers. We hope this interview has been enlightening for those of you watching. Self-publishing is about connecting with readers, building your brand, and growing as an author. With partners like Aguante Publishing, the journey becomes much more rewarding. Thank you again, Jonathan, for your time and expertise, and to all of our viewers. Thank you for joining us. Happy writing and best wishes.
The goal of Aguante Publishing is to generate revenue to be paid to creators as they work on their books.